Yes. Hi all. Thank you very much for joining us today in this special edition of the Wednesday Stocks. This time we will continue our discussions on Rand's thoughts on the culture, and today's essay is global Balkanization. And let me start with a story of one of the most interesting discoveries of the last 15 years. So it's 2008 in the outskirts of York. A group of archaeologists congregate near the remains of what was a village 3,000 years ago. There, in the middle of the mud, they find the 2,600-year-old skull. Inside it, scientists find the best and oldest preserved brain in history. The meaning and scientific contribution of this finding are many, but they are outside of our discussion. What's interesting for today is that the DNA test suggests that the brain belonged to a poor man of the Tuscany or the Middle East. He was probably doing anthropologist studies, but being an outsider, he became the subject of a barbaric ritual which ended with his life. Why do people do this? Ritualism, ostracism, and violence to the one who looks different. This will be the topic for today. So not far away from where the discovery was made, there's a professor, the same who's joining us today. He's the main face of the YouTube channel, and he needs no introduction. He's Nikos.
Thanks. Not a professor though. My university is gonna think I got the promotion. No, I'm a senior lecturer, but thank you. It's the same as a professor in the States.
Okay, well, senior lecturer. And I couldn't think for someone better than him to talk about the issues that we will be talking about, especially because he has just published this book, Identity Politics and Tribalism, The New Culture Wars. So before we begin, let me say that the people who are watching live, we will be tracking super chat feature, any questions that you issue. Okay, let's start. So Nikos, could you talk a bit more about what's the essence of this essay?
So this essay is, first of all, an attempt to understand something that was happening during that time in the 70s, which was ethnic tensions. But at the same time, it talks about the phenomenon of tribalism. So today, for some people, this essay might not really ring many bells. It's relevant if they focus on the ethnic tensions. However, I don't know how old you are, Alejandro, but I think we are somewhere close to the same generation. We remember, for example, the Yugoslav Civil War. So some of the things where Rand says, keep an eye on these things, they're not going to end well. No, actually, I shouldn't be laughing. They ended up in tragedy, actually. But the way she foresees it in 77, that, look, people, this is not going to end well, it's very, very interesting. So she talks about different ethnic conflicts, like she talks about the Balkans, but also outside of the Balkans. She talks about Spain, about the Basque versus the mains, she talks about the Catalans. So today, these things to us are a bit more, they make more sense. But in 77, what, the Basque, the Catalans, isn't this one country under Franco, under a very strong ruler? What are these movements? So in a way, it's a prophetic one. But the most interesting thing is that she notices what is the mechanism behind this disintegration. So basically, this is Balkanization. The way she uses it is disintegration. Literal disintegration, not disintegration from your mind. So disintegration that starts from here, but then it becomes actual disintegration in terms of countries literally disintegrating.
And she talks about two roots about this disintegration, one of them being collectivism and the other one being irrationalism. Could you comment a bit more on that?
Right. To do this, let's see, first of all, what is tribalism? Tribalism is that you see yourself first and foremost as part of a group, which is close to collectivism. What does Peikoff say about collectivism? Your existential horizon is the group. But also it has something else, that your group has opposing interests to every other group. So in theory, you could imagine a collectivist who is not a tribalist, but every tribalist in a way is a collectivist. every tribalist says the group first. Now, how is this related to irrationality? Well, the one goes with the other. It's one thing to say, I like Alejandro and I like Razi, so we're going to form a community, an actual community, a virtual community. Or if you hurt Alejandro, he's my friend, and I'm going to defend him because I know you as a character, I judge you as a character. Therefore, by using my mind, we form a strong bond. That's not the same, however, as the tribalism that is described here. In the tribalism that is described here, the group is above your mind. The group, the collective, is above your own judgment. And this is how we come up with collectivism plus irrationality. And in a way, you cannot imagine the one without the other.
And also, I think there's another element, which I mean, you could say that, for instance, a Marxist or in the Soviet Union would also be kind of a rationalist and kind of a collectivist, but he's probably not a tribalist. There's another element, and that's something that in previous talks with James and Don we have talked about, and that's the anti-conceptual mentality. Could you explain a bit more on what is the anti-conceptual mentality and how does it build upon this kind of idea, and how does it distinguish this tribalism from other kinds of collectivism?
So, what is the anti-conceptual mentality? Let's picture it in a simple way. I look around me. So, first of all, I'm already convinced that there is no such thing as reason, individual judgment, right? And that's what the culture is telling me, by the way. Now I still have a problem, though. I still need to find a way to navigate the world, because no matter what is your philosophy, somehow you have to exist in this world. You have this, I don't want to call it instinct, but in simple words, quote, instinct to survive. So now the question becomes, how am I to survive? I'm convinced that I cannot do it myself because I'm lacking the tools. So I need to find people who can support me in this existential fear, in this existential horror. What's the easiest thing to find? This guy looks like me. We have the same skin color. Or this guy, he's from my village. Or we have the same genitalia, therefore a common enemy. So this is the anti-conceptual mentality, that I cannot reach concepts such as we have the same values, we have the same beliefs, we have the same goals, the same vision for the future. That's too complicated. Or, as Rand says, even the Marxist view, which says proletarians of the world unite, that's already too far-fetched. And it's not a coincidence that today, in a world where anti-conceptual mentality is everywhere, Marxism actually is in retreat. Now, I know many will be triggered, say, no, isn't Marxism everywhere? No, what we see in a way is the decline of Marxism. This identity politics that says we are split in 80, 100 different groups. In a way, although you could say there are some epistemological, at the root, similarities with Marxism, but in its essence, in its political essence, it's in a way a negation of Marxism. So even this Marxist message is too complicated, and you have to stick to, oh, I look like this guy, or we're from the same village, or as Ayn Rand said, which triggered me, we dance the same traditional dances, because I dance some Cretan dances, so I appreciate some tribal Cretan culture, but see, I understand where she's coming from. So this is the point, this is what brings us together. This, though, has another result. This is not going to end well, because if you haven't got a mind of your own, and you link hands with other people who also know that they haven't got, so the one is staring at the other on who's going to act. Remember that scene in Atlas Shrugged where the train is stuck, and you have all these people of the time, so to speak, all these products of the culture, and no one's doing anything. They're staring at each other, and if Dagny wasn't there, they would probably stay there till the end of time, till they would die. So you think that you're going to cling with other people who are like you, but this clinging doesn't make it that much better. You are still in horror, but now you share this horror with other people. So imagine you see yourself as a zero, and you add your zero to the zero of others. What is the result? The result is still zero. So that's the situation that Rand is describing, and that's why he says this is not gonna end well. There's no way this can end. This can and it can end well, unless we change route.
I think we will talk a bit more about the bloodshed that she predicts, but uh, you mentioned that this concept of commonality, and I think it brings one concept that has become super mainstream in the culture, and that's ethnicity. So, what are the things that it brings upon as a commonality? This kind of concept. What she talks about race, and the other one is tradition. Could you comment a bit more on that?
Yeah, I found this quite interesting, and I know people like, for example, I know Razi had a revelation moment with the issue of ethnicity. Now, again, ethnicity as a Greek, I had a bit of a trouble getting exactly what she means, because in Greece, ethnos is exactly the same as nation. So Rand mentions United States doesn't call itself an ethnos, it calls itself a nation, which for me, it sounds a bit weird because it's exactly the same thing in Greek. But I guess what it goes with is ethnos is not just people that you form a community with based, let's say, on your common values. So it's not the founding father who said, okay, I see people around me who want to live under the same principles, so let's form this community, this new nation. The ethnos also have this idea of tradition. And here's the thing, nothing wrong with forming a community with people who you happen to be together for ages. But she says it cannot be only this. It cannot be only tradition. The question is it a good one? Is there something to be kept? So is your culture based on something which is worth preserving? If it's preserved because you share the same quote blood, or you dance the same dances, then this is something which goes even beyond racism. And seeing it today, it's very interesting how the term ethnicity and racism is and race is almost sometimes indistinguishable. So if you see HR forms, they say, what's your ethnic background, for example, and it has these 58 categories that, I have to be honest with you, till like, I don't know, 10 years ago, till I started working and having to fill out HR forms, I didn't even know that thing. I didn't know that I was a Caucasian. Like I literally had to Google it, because I was, okay, I don't see, where is my category? So I had to check Caucasian, but I don't come from the Caucasus. So why am I Caucasian? Anyway, so this is a term that she says, notice it's not the same as the nation. And actually it's a term that is very much, let's say, embedded in a very almost racist understanding. But I also want to hear your view on the issue of ethnicity, because what does it mean for you? So basically, Rand says, as you said, it's race plus tradition, and it's a way of living that is not supposed to change. So how do you understand ethnicity, and what did you find interesting in the term?
I think one of the most interesting things in this essay is how Rand is talking about mental passivity, and it's surrounding that idea. First of all, with this notion of how people want to cling to other people on a perceptual basis, but also on not wanting to improve and work hard upon to change their environment, and that's the concept also of tradition. So there's passivity in two bases: one on where and who you follow, and also what do you do. And just as a personal anecdote of mine, I was, for instance, watching the other day this guy who collects and processes salt like if it were like the 1700s or earlier, despite of there being mining, like industrialized mining and industrialized processing of salt. But he just wants to go over salt with the salt processing and everything with his feet, just because it's easy for him, and he doesn't want to think and see how the other people do it, even though it's not better salt or anything.
So here, though, we have to be careful in one particular way. So in some ways, many things done quote traditionally are better than things that are done not traditional. Let me give you a very simple example. So let's take olive oil. So the way we get olive oil, because I happen to have some olive oil trees in Crete, is you basically hit the tree, it comes down, and then you bring it to the process thing. They literally squeeze it, they put it in a bottle, they give you the bottle. It doesn't get cleaner than that. So that olive oil is better than the olive oil that I get to the supermarket. Therefore, I get to the expense of sending it from Crete to wherever I am. Now, do I do it because it's quote traditional? No, I do it because that happens to be the best process. Now, someone who comes into my house and see bottles of oil without a label could say, oh, you are backward. No, it happens to be better. Or some diets, for example, or some traditional quote traditional ways of exercise, things like that. So you see these things being popular, and then you have to ask the question, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because it used to be done this way, in which case it doesn't make sense, and there are many cultural norms that are like this? Or do you find a value in it which you can describe and which you can explain, first of all, to yourself, why you're doing it this way? So this is this, and it's very important to, I'm very glad that you brought up tradition, because we see an ideology called traditionalism rising, particularly entirely on the right. And there are all these accounts on Twitter that post photos with cathedrals or with old photos with women with shirts, happy families, and they say, this is what we've lost. And then the question to ask is, okay, is there a value? There might be a value in that, but is the value that there's something to it, or is that it's what it used to be done? Because a lot of things that used to be done don't make much sense today. And you mentioned ostracism, for example, which even in the best societies, in ancient Athens, for example, it could be a very, 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 very unfair process. For people who don't know, so let's say this is a rock. Ostraco is literally a cell. So once every month, year, I don't know, people would write the name of someone they didn't like in the city. So let's say I don't like Alejandro because we like the same girl. Okay, I write Alejandro, and if many people vote for Alejandro, now you're out of the city. So the traditionalist who's going to say, oh, I love ancient Athens because of this and this, is okay. But if someone says, actually, I would say that person is not a traditionalist. That person is a valuer of ancient Athens. But the traditionalist will say, oh, we need to go back because it was done in a good way. So that's the difference. Do you like it because it's good, or do you like it because it's old? And quite often there is an overlap, but you have to be careful on what are your criteria.
I agree. I think it's not a good idea to do that thing if you like the same thing. That's not proper for someone who is doing flirting with reason, Nikos.
Sorry, it's not?
It's not a good advice when you're doing flirting with reason.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm not gonna write.
I think
although I had the discussion with someone on. Okay, I don't want to bring issue of duels because Raz is gonna fire me. Raz, I'm just kidding. We're not having duels with Alejandro if we like the same girl. Okay, let's proceed.
We will talk about bloodshed later if you want, but yeah, I think one of the crucial things in this essay is when Rand talks about how this tribalism is permeating to Western societies when it had almost completely vanished. And she mentions that this is happening because of two reasons. One is political and the other one is educational. Could you comment a bit more on the political reason, which is basically, she mentions mixed economies?
Okay. So what is the essence of mixed economy? The essence of mixed economy is that there is a pool of stuff that is to be redistributed. And now the question we're asking is, how do we redistribute it? And you can have many different ways. You could say so for example, under Greek style of Socialism in the 80s, it was mostly based on people who worked in the public sector because they were the political clients. That's how we redistribute. Again, Rand somehow foresees that the next big thing is going to be what today we call the categories of diversity. So there are different groups, and these groups need to be represented. Now, an example, let's give a micro example from a university, let's say. We have a Women Day where we celebrate women. But someone else says, yes, but there's also this other group that is underrepresented, let's say people of color. Okay, now we also need to have a day of celebrating people of color. Now someone says, yeah, but what about this other group that also has been left outside? We need to do something about that as well. Okay. Now you could say in the university, this is quite innocent. There's something to it. You could say cultural celebration, whatever. Imagine this though on the level of the state. And as Rand says, what happens with the mixed economies? You have literally a pie. This pie might be growing, but there is a pie. And you want your piece of that pie. So each group says, what about me? That's the first thing. The group says, what about me? What about us? We need some of that pie. But there's also a second thing which is going on. If you're not part of a group, odds are you're at the part where your stuff is taken away from you. So you have to join a group. You have to join a tribe. You have to join an interest group. Example, without hopefully giving a spoiler. By the way, I appreciated so much the other day, someone commented on the Daily Objective that they're reading Atlas Shrugged these days, so they appreciated that I didn't give a spoiler. I hope I'm not going to give a spoiler. So at some point in the book, the central planners gather together to pass a legislation. And you have Fred Keenan, who is representing labor, someone who's representing business, the industrialist, James Taggart, who's representing the transportation, a central planner, someone who is representing the intellectual world, and someone who's representing politics. And these people gather there as friends, supposedly. But it's very interesting how each one wants to basically devour the other, eat alive the other, because they realize that my gain is your loss. So you see a process of backstabbing and what can I take away from you? Now, again, this is something which is inviting you to join, to find and join your own tribe. So in a way, finding and joining your own tribe becomes an issue of survival. So poor Reardon, for example, doesn't join any tribe. He's left outside. So the legislation is going to fall on his head. He's going to be the main victim. Why? Because he didn't join one of the groups who's going to try to take stuff away from the pie. So under the mixed economy, my neighbor is not anymore my neighbor. Is someone I need to keep an eye on. And ideally, I need to join hands with other people to keep an eye on that neighbor, because then that neighbor might join hands with other people to keep an eye on me. So this is, let's say, the political aspect of the welfare state creating these tribalism. And there's some more, but I'd want to also hear your take on the educational aspect, and then we can go to the super chats.
I don't consider myself knowledgeable enough to comment precisely on the educational element, although her argument is that progressive education has led to people think in terms of anti-conceptual thinking, in the sense that they teach them to think about things and not about how to integrate these things into concepts. And also another issue is that they have tried to make people think in terms of how to belong to groups. And that has led to people becoming more tribalistic in their own mentality. I think one of our hopes is to talk about the main essay in which Rand talks about how this mentality is created in the Comprachicos in
the return of the primitive.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to go on the super chats?
Yes. So the first one is from Robert. He says, as usual, on this rant was remarkably prescient. I don't know. But yes, I agree. As you said, Nikos, she's again some kind of Cassandra, stating what's going to happen, but very few people listening.
See, sorry, I have to say that she even predicts the conflict between Greece and, okay, now I'm going to get in trouble, but the country that calls itself, okay, the country that is now recognized as North Macedonia, which that my compatriots don't like this at all, because they say, no, there is Macedonia is in Greece. But the people who live in that country say, no, we are Macedonia. So now so for years, we entered an agreement that says, okay, we're going to call you a former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, but not Macedonia. Again, notice, it's okay to call you former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, but not Macedonia. And then we said, okay, we're going to call you North Macedonia. But when we'd say this, we'd put the country in quotation marks. So, and this started being an issue at some point in when Yugoslavia collapsed, or at some point 91, 92. And Rand already from 77 notices that, there's also unresolved ferment among Macedonians, some of whom on occasion revive all dreams of their own state, including Greek Salonika and part of Bulgaria. In 77, I don't think there were more than 1% of Greeks who knew that there's this republic that calls itself Macedonian at some point. Anyway, I know there are also some objectivists from the country. So, okay, let's not make this a discussion about that country, which today is called officially North Macedonia.
Yeah, I find it from these separatist movements, I think that the most bizarre are the ones who claim to some sovereignty because some ancestor of theirs did something apparently great, which I'm not even sure that Alexander was that good. But also Corsica has, I think they have that claim that because Napoleon was from there, they can secede from the country.
Well, actually, I before we finish today, we need to talk about secession, because she says something very, very key on secession. And I think at some point, Rand is a bit unfair when she talks about tribal conflicts in Balkan. Tribal conflicts in Balkan were not only about who dances what, they were also about freedom. So they were also about freedom from the Ottomans. So, and you could say that living under tribal rule in Greece in 80-60 was not great, but it was better than living under the regime that had way less respect for individual rights, put this way. So I think she's a bit historically unfair to some of the struggles in the Balkans particularly, although I totally get where she's coming from and where she says that you people are going to continue fighting over things that they only make sense to you, and that's not a way to go through life, basically.
The other super chat is from Bonnie, and she says, sorry if this was already mentioned, but the essay Global Balkanization is in the Voice of Reason, audio of her in 1977, speech is free on ARR site. Yes, yeah. And the Q&A, it's also amazing. If you want to go through it, I mean, the listener, I truly recommend it. Should we move to the why is there going to be bloodshed?
Right. Yeah. So what you mean bloodshed on the ethnic level? Because we already discussed about the mixed economy. So which example should we bring forward? So I don't want to bring the example of Yugoslavia, because there you have historical conflicts. So it's in a way, it's too simple. So what happens there is you have people who used to see themselves as different. They have differences in the way, for example, of their religion. So Serbs Orthodox, Croats, mostly Catholics, Bosnians, some Orthodox, some Catholic, some Muslim. And this was, and under Tito, now we have this big socialist homeland, with the exception that people still feel that's part of this. So, as the journalist says, there are two things happening at the same time. One thing is integration, the other thing is fragmentation. But in a way, you could say the one leads to the other because it's an integration, not on principles that everyone is sold to these principles. So I know many people consider Marshal Tito was such a genius and he managed to keep these people together. Yeah, he was a charismatic personality as a dictatorship. So if you put a gun in my head and you tell me you have to go and live in a dictatorship, I would go to Tito's Yugoslavia anytime compared to any other socialist country. Having said that, it's not that Tito managed to keep these people together, and when Tito's genius came away from the scene, this collapsed. This was, in a way, it was meant to collapse, because it's not that these people were kept together by these, so they continue to view themselves as Serbs, as Croats, and all that stuff. And of course, it's not a coincidence that, in a way, the Yugoslav conflict, you could see it in sports before the actual war. You could see, for example, that players viewed themselves as, no, I'm a Croat, you're a Serb. But I think the most interesting example of tribalism is Rwanda, is the genocide there. And it's the conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Because there, you don't even have the ethnic difference. So a Hutu and a Tutsi they look the same, they have the same religion, they speak the same language, there's no difference at all. The only difference is the made up difference of historic, not made up because it's based on real historical animosity, but it's, I know that you, Alejandro, are a Hutu and you know that I'm a Tutsi, but in a way that, in the same way that I know that you support this team and I support this other team. So there you have naked tribalism for the sake of tribalism. And we see this tribalist thing exploding in 94 in a massacre that cost the life of hundreds of thousands of people. And one thing very important about Rwanda, because again, people don't get it. They think, oh, it was this backward country. It's probably, primitive tribes fighting each other. No. Rwanda was not a primitive country with tribes fighting each other. They were speaking English. They were going to churches. They were Christians. So it doesn't work to see them as outside of this. So the key to understand the massacre was not all these backward people. It was the naked essence of tribalism, that I don't like these people because they're in a different tribe, and our tribe is in a perpetual war with that tribe, and only one can actually prevail. And the interesting thing is, when they asked, there was a guy who went to the prison and asked some genocide perpetrators, how did you know who to kill? You all look the same in a way that it's not that you go to that church and it's a church. It says, in a village, you know everyone. I knew that this person is Tutsi. I knew that this person didn't do anything bad to me. So sometimes they say, look, I had this problem that I kind of like this guy. We grew up, we're playing football, but he's a Tutsi, therefore he has to pay. So it's not that tribalism is going to lead to Rwanda, but it could lead to Rwanda, because the mindset is we are not the same and we are in conflict, and it's either us or them. There is no communication between us and them.
Yeah. I mean, another example, I think it's in Dominican Republic, the Trujillo dictatorship, when I think it was in their Senate, they started to kill Haitians, and it was called the Perejil massacre, just because there's a word in Spanish called perejil, which basically, in the Creole language, it sounds very different. And they were asked to say the word perejil, and if they didn't answer properly, they would be killed.
So yeah, so the criteria basically, so this was a test. Are you part of the right tribe or not?
I think so, yeah. So, Nikos, you wanted to bring the issue of secession. So, what is your opinion on that? And first of all, what does Rand say about when is it proper to secede?
So I'm going to read
And
the whole part because it's key. Now, what's the context? I find it interesting. So quite often, our beef with libertarians is their belief in secession, particularly anarchists. So Michael Malice, for example, has a very seemingly reasonable take, which says, look, now in the United States, we just have to face we cannot live together anymore. The SJW in California with the Trumpite in Texas, they have different values, different belief systems. They don't like each other. They don't think that there can be one country to serve to how to put it, to express both of their values. Therefore, they have to part ways, which is not necessarily completely unreasonable. But let's see what Rand says about secession. She mostly talks about the secession based on ethnicity. So for people who are in the book, page 128, some people ask whether local groups or provinces have the right to secede from the country of which they are part. The answer is, on ethnic grounds, no. Ethnicity is not a valid consideration, morally or politically, and does not endow anyone with any special rights. As to other than ethnic grounds, remember that rights belong only to individuals and that there is no such thing as, quote, group rights. If a province, and now here's the important part, if a province wants to secede from a dictatorship or even from a mixed economy in order to establish a free country, it has the right to do so. But if a local gang, ethnic or otherwise, wants to secede in order to establish its own government controls, it does not have that right. No group has the right to violate the rights of the individuals who happen to live in the same locality. A wish, individual or collective, is not a right. So in a way, then she would dismiss the Basques, the Catalans who want to secede. And here's the interesting thing, though. What if the Catalans would say, I want to secede because I want more freedom? Or put differently, what if you have the United Kingdom, one part of which, Scotland, the majority, the vast, okay, not the vast majority, but a majority wants a party, votes for a party, the SNP, which is, in my view, the worst political phenomenon in the Western world in terms of, okay, not neo-Nazis and stuff, but let's say from the mainstream politics, the worst. Quasi-socialism, quasi-environmentalism, nanny-state on steroids. So if they say we want to leave, should you say, okay, please go? Then what about the rights of the Scottish people who are left behind? So how would you untangle this, Alejandro?
Yes, I mean the basic principle here is, will that country respect individual rights, or at least will it respect it more than the current country? And more, I think it should be a significant way compared to what it's the rights are currently being protected. Now, I think there's something to think about the content of that. And for instance, my knowledge on the Catalan movement, their proposal at the either is because, for what I've seen, it's very limited, and they only have like this document called I think it's called the Cries, the Catalan Cries. I don't remember the exact name of it, and it's basically, imagine all the people, John Lennon and everything like that. And that's not a document for asking for anything, let alone to ask for a secession of a country. I mean, we can disagree in the content, or if this will lead to greater freedom, but in essence, I don't think that there is anything that could justify the secessionist movements in both Spain and for what I've seen in Scotland.
Right. I think here context matters. So, for example, let's say during the Franco years, I would be way more tolerant to someone who wants to secede by a regime which is oppressive, way more oppressive than what would come later. But the question is, do you want to secede because of that? Or do you want to secede anyway? And this is, let's say, your justification. Because even today they want to secede, and it's never been explained why they want to secede. Now, I've been to the Basque Country. It's very interesting. Its culture is, in some ways, it feels different from Madrid, but in other ways it does not. But what about the fact that these people the vast majority don't think that they belong to that country? Historically, they say we're ashamed of what this country has done to us. So you could see how it's mixed with the idea of more freedom. By the way, when we talk about nationalism to my students, and when I try to explain to them what separatists mean, I show them a scene which is very, very telling. 2011, Copa del Rey in Spain. Copa del Rey is their FA Cup, the equivalent. And because it's called Copa del Rey, the Cup of the King, before the final, there's the national anthem. So in 2011, and I think 2015, in the final, you have Bilbao and Barcelona. And ceremonially, before the final, the headphones, the speakers, how it's called, they play the national anthem. And you can understand it's a stadium, the speakers are very loud. From the booing of both the Basques and the Catalans, you cannot listen to the national anthem. So you have there 80,000 people who clearly say, I don't want to be part of that. And again, my question is, if de facto you're going to end up in a country which respects freedom more, do they deserve more of our sympathy? In which case, my answer would be yes. But again, what about the Scottish? Then you would say they want a system with less freedom, but at the same time, so if they are dragging, let's say, the United Kingdom back into more statism, is it a solution to say, okay, go away? So it's not easy, but I can understand that. For example, what about the liberty-loving Scottish people who are going to stack behind? So it's not a solution to say, okay, just go away and I don't care what happens to you anymore. But it's way more difficult than way more complex than. So many objectivists dismiss secession just like that. But again, so we've lived in an orgy of statism. The last 18 months was the zenith of that. So if you had, let's say, Texas saying, you know what, I've had enough of all that. You don't represent anymore the Constitution. You don't anymore represent the spirit of this country. I'm off. Or think about Colorado in Atlas Shrugged. If at the point early in part 2, when they want to destroy Colorado, Colorado says, you know what, you're not the United States anymore. You're not the country I knew. Bye-bye. We are the true country that defends the tradition, the good tradition, not because it's tradition, I mean, the values of this country. Therefore, bye-bye. They will have my support, I think. Again, that's not the line, that's not the ARC UK line. That's my personal take on the topic.
I mean, what is the American Revolution if not a secession? And I think it's a proper movement. Yeah.
So, but the problem is it's not very easy to find, is it for that or is it for stupid tribal reasons? So that's not, or for example, when Lithuania wants to secede from Soviet Union, they do it for many different reasons, but you have to say, okay, I see that something good is going to come out of that. And by the way, hat off, they were so brave, they stood instead in front of the Soviet tanks. So yeah, that's some good secession for you there. Sorry, one thing though, because we need to mention this. Totally different from saying I want to secede because I want to keep my slaves, which was basically the secession of the South. Now, many are going to bring arguments that say the Civil War was not basically about slavery. And I could buy some of it. There is some historical accuracy in the stuff that Lincoln didn't mainly do the war for the slaves. I can discuss this. But the essence here is that these people wanted to secede and they wanted to secede. And as a result of that, they could keep violating rights, which is not okay. It's like saying, I want to secede from this country because I want to torture someone in my basement. No, you don't have the right to do it, or at least the moral right, because these things are usually decided by the power and the might of weapons.
With that being said, I think for both ending in a positive way and to make a contrast, I think it would be easy. It would be a good idea to bring the complete opposite of that, and that is capitalism. Could you comment, Nikos, why is it the complete opposite to this passivity, and why those random things is such a positive movement?
So the key to that, for those of you who are on the book, is on page 129, and she compares. Actually, before that, sorry, there's one other interesting thing when it comes to capitalism. So she says, sorry, let me find my, yeah. So I'm not sure which page it is, but she says that tribalism is incompatible with four things. And we already touched upon, so I'm going to go through it quickly. It's incompatible with reason, because your starting point is not reality and how your mind understands it. It's what the group says. Incompatible with independence and individuality. I would put this as one group, actually. Independence is individuality. Independent means I have to make my own judgments. Tribalism says, no, you have to follow what is good for the group as decided by the group. And also, it's opposite to progress. Why? Because progress has to do with reason and individuality. And the tribe is usually stuck to stagnation. Now, if I tell you which is the system that is based on reason, independence / individuality, progress, obviously you're going to say capitalism. And here she comes to a circle to the end. And she says, notice why they attack capitalism and how the attacks are the complete opposite of what they attack it for. So she says, quote, observe the paradoxes built upon capitalism. It has been called a system of selfishness, and yet it's the only system that drew men to unite on a large scale into great countries and peacefully to cooperate. Then capitalism has become a system of greed, yet it is the system that raised the standard of living of its poorest citizens. Capitalism has become nationalistic. And by the way, this is what Marxists say, that capitalism leads to wars. And going back to the book, yet it is the only system that banished ethnicity and made it possible in the United States for men of various formerly antagonistic nationalities to live together in peace. And then capitalism has been called cruel, yet it brought such hope, progress, and general goodwill that the young people of today who have not seen it find it hard to believe. And you know what I remembered seeing this? I remember the video of the essay I Pencil. That's, I think, from Leonard Reed, but Friedman made it possible. And if you see this beautiful video that I think the how it's called, the Freedom and Economics Education, or something like that. So they say that through trade, you cooperate with people that otherwise you might not like, based on your tribalist past, people from different ethnicities. Foundation for Economic Education, yes. Or think about in sports, how sports have helped people to overcome racism. So free cooperation and free trade is the way to get to leave behind these bad tendencies. And notice that this is the ground on which many on the right actually attack capitalism, particularly the reactionary right or the traditionalist right or the white nationalists. They say capitalism takes away your identity. And in a way, this is correct. But again, if there's something to your identity, why should you take it away? If it's something that is worth keeping, then keep it. And then they will say, by default, though, people with a strong sense of identity are better at resisting some of the decadent trends of our time. And again, this is correct, but it's correct by default, because they are not only resisting the bad tendencies, but they also might be resisting some good tendencies. So why not resist these tendencies, but based on healthy grounds rather than merely the ground of tradition? And again, I'm someone who appreciates good traditions. I love going to Crete. I like dancing Cretan dances, sometimes even dressing the traditional stuff, putting this thing on the head. I can see some value with it. Okay, it's a good experience. I appreciate that community. Kind of brings you together. I get all that. But at the very, 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 very end of the day, what is your compass? Is it your mind and your values, or is it this amorphous thing of what is good for the quote community or for the tradition?
Yes. And I mean, I've recently been reading and researching about the Titanic just because personal reasons.
The Titanic.
The Titanic, the sinking of the Titanic. And there's a mystique on that. Like, some people cling to it as if there was something hidden that they cannot express that much, and what happened there, and what is hidden after 3 kilometers of water. And I think one is the end of the Victorian era, the end of this age of progress, everything's so beautiful. But I think another thing that I hadn't known until now is how proactive the crew was. Because usually we hear that, oh, they were so negligent and they didn't do anything. But I think that after researching this, one of the things that I've been realizing is that if it weren't for them, there had been 2,000 deaths instead of 1,500s, because they were so good at doing their job. They were so focused that I cannot see that happening today in today's world. And that is what capitalism is: productivity, thinking, improvement, enjoyment.
That's and again, though, unfortunately, see how easily it falls prey, capitalism, to the attacks of the people who support tradition. Why? Because they say it's what we're saying with Razi on the Daily Objective. They say at least we have some values. What is your values, supporters of liberal capitalism? Is your values the shopping mall, and that's where your values end? So capitalism has to be supported on things like the things that you said, people who were committed to doing their jobs, or think about heroes like Reardon, or real life examples of this. So this is how to sell free, quote, sell capitalism. Instead of that, what do you see liberal think tank doing? Oh, if we take income tax from 36% to 28%, then you're going to see that imports are going to go up 0.8%. Who cares? Who cares? Where's the heroism? Where are the values? Where's the inspiration there? And there's no reason why these things could not be part of capitalism. Capitalism tells you, be your best self, be a hero, go and conquer, but don't conquer with chopping heads, conquer by creating and by producing. So I find something very valuable to defending capitalism based on stories like the one you brought about.
I agree. Nikos, I just have one last question for you, and basically it has to do with your book. I think how, if the people who have read this essay, how they will find this discussion of tribalism actualized in your book.
So the book checks where tribalism comes from, the tribals of the left and the tribals of the right, but there is one chapter, which is actually the first chapter after the introduction, where it says why most people understand tribalism in a wrong way. Because for most people, tribalism is inherent. It's an instinct. It's a bug in the system, which is in the software, basically. And who is the one person who challenges that? Ayn Rand. So Ayn Rand, I think, has the best understanding of tribalism than anyone else, because he sees it as an epistemological phenomenon. Now, someone will ask, how then do you explain that 98% of the people are tribal? And I'm tribal as well. So there has been cases where I tear up when a Greek athlete wins in the Olympics, or I get goosebumps in the national anthem when Greece is in a big tournament. There are non-tribal reasons to do this. You know, you have memories, your beloved people are in that country and all the stuff. But here's how Rand, so if you ask me, you are gonna forget everything that Ayn Rand wrote, and you keep one thing that really changed your view of the world. I would say the quote on page 117. And this was basically the book in a nutshell is this quote here, quote, "If men accept the notion that reason is not valid, what is to guide them and how are they to live? Obviously, they will seek to join some group, any group which claims the ability to lead them and to provide some sort of knowledge acquired by some sort of unspecified means." This is where we are today. Reason is invalid, or it doesn't exist, you haven't got free will, or it's different based on which group you are, and you're thrown to the world, and it's like, okay, now makes sense. But without reason, how do I make sense? Now the world is scary. So now I am like this, you've seen this painting, The Scream. I'm like this painting, I'm in horror, existential horror. What do I need to save myself from existential horror? I need to cling to other people. I need to cling to people who look like me or who think like me based on our characteristics. So this quote explains in the best possible way anything that has to do with where we find ourselves today with tribalism. So this book is trying to apply this idea of Ayn Rand on where tribalism comes from to today's culture wars, and also trace it back historically, and also trace it to today's phenomenon of the culture wars, and in the conclusion, hopefully, to offer a way beyond the tribalism, both for a more civil and less toxic public sphere, but most importantly, for people's life. I mean, the problem when you're a tribalist is it sucks for the other people, but also it sucks for you, because it's like you're wearing glasses that they have this fog, you can't really see well.
Thank you, Nikos. This thing arrived yesterday for me, so I haven't been able to read, just except for the introduction, where you talk about how you tear up with Greece winning. But I will go through it, and I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, the introduction is my tribalist past, basically.
Okay, I'm looking forward to.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
And I think that's it. We'll call it for the day, and thank you for all the audience for the super chats and for tuning up today.
Okay, thanks
Thank you.
everyone. Bye-bye.